Hello, post-commentary Raiji here to talk to you about this 62 fear speedrun. Now, in a good run, it's a good start, and this run certainly has the best possible one. I had been resetting for youres and had seen a hammer once before in the C1, but it was a load of shit. So seeing Psychic on that hammer was very nice. Now, thankfully, our first two rooms here are rather quick, and we get to chain our skip into a chaos gate. Unfortunately, we didn't break onion on Artificer there, but it's not the end of the world. We have more opportunities to do so before we even see a major reward. Thankfully, this chaos gate is incredibly useful, and we get a gain out of it. All we have to do is play out 4 chambers, a little bit safer with our magic than we normally would, and then we get a gain. What does help with this is a nice one wave here. I was unsure at the time whether it would be one, but it turned out it was. And we get to break onion on our Artificer and take a Zeus boon. After boon would have been nice as well, though I decided that the aggressive option would work far better in our favor as we already have a gain from chaos and we're looking for more damage. In the case of Zeus, this would be either a Blitz special or a Storm Ring, though unfortunately we don't see either and have to settle for a Heaven Strike. Now, Heaven Strike is not the end of the world, far from it in fact. It's actually really quite good with Psychic Whirlwind, though attacks like Apollo here or definitely Hera would speed up the run quite a bit more. We end up hitting a Blinding Rush from Apollo, completing our Ridge, and then chain into Arachne. And after Arachne, we'll see a mid-shot. Dress doesn't really matter from Arachne here. The only dress that really increases our speed at all would be Cast Dress, and seeing as we don't have a cast at this point, this would not be optimal. So we just click 60 armor. We end up skipping the Afro boon there for the same reason as stated before. It would sort of clog up the pool, and at this point we already had Apollo in pool and could potentially hit Lucid Game, which would be far better for overlapping whirlwind procs. Here we see Artemis, which is incredibly good for our timer, allows us to skip, and a potential useful crit boon. Things we're looking for here would be Vital Signs, or Lethal Snare, or Pressure Points. Anything that can give us a nice crit bonus that we can carry through the rest of the run. Now, Artemis rooms you typically play a bit slower as the timer is a non-issue since it is paused. The only tech you want to do is leave the last enemy alive until Artemis aims her arrow and kill it so she will spawn instantly and you don't have to lose any time. We end up hitting Lethal Snare on Epic and take an Apollo boon. At this point, I am looking for Lucid Gain, and since we have a Daze effect, we can also get into Backburner, which will increase our damage by a shit ton. This is more of the typical Erebus room, which we had sort of avoided up till this point. Lots of small enemies, lots of staggered spawns, not really good for our time, but since Nergal is such a monster at room clear, we're able to get out of it relatively quickly. Unfortunately, both Lucid and Backburner stack up, but you can't just pass up on an epic Backburner. That would be completely sacrilegious. It would be pure evil. And since our Chaos Boon is online now, we don't really have to worry about gain for quite a while. End up clicking P image, and are essentially done with Apollo for the rest of the run. Again, from Zeus here, we're looking for Storm Ring. As a note for trials on 62 speeds, they are incredibly useful since trials are unaffected by hordes, and this one was incredibly late. We were able to blitz through it without an issue. We take Static Shock, which is still really good, but it does mean that we still don't have our Storm Ring. I end up taking the Hermes here, hoping for success rate, but end up getting absolute dog shit and have to settle for a mean streak. Here we are into Hecate. I suppose I can take this time to sort of talk about rivals bosses in general on 62 speeds. Now, normally in a 62 fear, you would use something like Lovers as a sort of defense. You know, you play the boss as carefully as possible as to not take damage or not get hit, and that would involve preserving your lovers. Now, on 62 speeds, lovers are more of a resource than a protection. You want to use them tactically in order to tank hits and do as much damage to the bosses as possible. This is also where Nergal will shine, because Nergal can use health as a resource and take hits purposefully in order to do the maximum amount of damage and clear bosses as quickly as possible. There in Hecate, we sort of ignore all mechanics, including Sheepball since we have Freenos, and do as much damage as possible until we get that quick kill, leaving Erebus with sub 230 on the timer, which is quite good. As we go into Oceanus, I'll take a time to speak on keepsakes for the run. I believe they're pretty set in stone. I think J-Palm Fig Droplet Antler is the way to go. Fig obviously allows you to skip 3 chambers throughout the run, like that. Skipping chamber 1 of Oceanus is a big time save. Seeing sea serpents in this room was a bit unfortunate, though the tile is so small that they're not really that big of a time loss. We're able to get out of the room relatively quickly and get our shot. Now, seeing shot before mini-boss is quite good because of things like this. If that Chaos Gate wasn't there and we saw this rat first, we would have been scammed out of our mid-shop and I would have been a very unhappy camper. Fortunately, we saw it first, and we have that Chaos Gate there as insurance if we don't see Narc here to chain even more skips. Though we do see Narc, and we end up avoiding the Chaos Gate. From Narc, we end up taking gold, which allows us an in-shot boon, and we continue on. This room was a bit unfortunate as there were lots of lightweights and the tile was rather large. Though we could have gotten even more unfavorable tile, and beggars can't be choosers. Seeing lots of pinheads here was a bit sad, though again, Nergal's room clear is so efficient that it doesn't really matter too much. We can sort of just psychic our way to victory and clear the room. We got more money for the rest of the run. End up seeing more sea serpents, though again, this tile is not the most unfavorable, and there are so many large enemies in the form of lurkers and mourners, and the sea serpents are armored, meaning that this last sea serpent will conclude the room. And we can head into our final shot. Entering Sirens with 330 on timer is incredibly efficient, and grabbing a gain boon finally in the form of a Born Gain is also very nice. I end up going back for this hex, hoping that it's a Twilight Curse to just increase DPS output for bossing and for room clear. Though we do see a Total Eclipse, which is essentially totally shit without something like Hestia in our pool, which we don't have. Again, as stated previously, lovers are a resource, and for 62 speeds you want to sort of just bum rush all 3 Sirens as they're grouped up, do as much damage as possible to kill them, and then run around and kill all the remaining tentacles. At least I think that this is the best strat, especially for something like Nergal, which can output a large amount of damage on multiple enemies very quickly. What I should have done here was drop a Total Eclipse on Roxy to kill it even faster, though in hindsight I don't really think it would have mattered too much as our damage was incredibly high. Again, we clear all 3 Sirens, run around the room, and kill the remaining tentacles. We got Carib feature here, but features don't really matter on 62 speeds as all 3 Sirens should die relatively quickly before you even have to engage with any of the mechanics. And that's Oceanus. We end up clearing Oceanus in 4 minutes 13 seconds, which is incredibly fast and made me very excited for the rest of the run. Now, I did have a bit tampered expectations, seeing as my previous PB of a sub 11 was immediately kicked to the curb with the fact that I got thorn circle. Now, this fields, as you can tell by the timer on this video, is a lot more efficient because we end up chaining some useful skips and don't see thorn circle. Unfortunately for us, we do get a really bad encounter one with staggered small enemy spawns from different sides of the room, which takes quite a while to finish. Here I take forever because I really like looking at blue nodes. I've noticed this about myself. Like, I love looking at blue nodes and thinking of like, oh, what will I get? And then eventually go, why am I looking at this? And just quickly click 3 random things because what the fuck? Like, you're not going to see any more path of stars. Here we chain Nim, which is very good. We get Nim into mini boss, which is very nice. Unfortunately, seeing Nim in fields is not the best. I would rather see her in tart, but seeing Nim at all is truly a huge time save. Because for a lot of my runs, I don't see her at all, which is very lame. And again, beggars can't be choosers in a format like this, so you just have to take what you get and play with it. And I am not one to complain about a skip. Here we clean out the rest of the enemies and wait for Nim to run to the reward and announce us the winner so we can take our reward and leave. Here at this point I'm hoping that I just don't get Fig on mini-boss, which thankfully I don't, which is a big time save, because Figging a mini-boss is fucking shit. Obviously encounters are far longer than mini-bosses, and things like the Phantom die relatively quickly. Here we get our Echo Room, and hope for something like Evade, which we end up hitting. This will allow us to play far more aggro and far riskier than we would have been able to otherwise. Here we get a somewhat favorable room. Like, obviously there are far better rooms that we could have gotten, but not seeing Thorn Circle is always a win in my book. End up chaining another skip there with Fig Leaf and play out this encounter. Rooms like this sort of demonstrate why I believe Droplet to be the best keepsake for location 3, not location, zone 3, I guess. Because rooms like this are fucking huge, and things like Blinding Sprint and Droplet allow you to rush through them very quickly. Here we pick up Heaven Splitter. There were 3 potentially good hammers there that we could have seen. There's being Dashing, Seething, and Heaven. I like Heaven a lot because it is a huge damage increase for mini bosses, or not for mini bosses, for bosses. I got distracted there because there's a mini boss in this encounter. Unfortunately, we didn't get optimal time save because it wasn't paired with Shadow Sport. But, you know, I'll take any sort of speed increase. We grab a Witch's Mark there. But as I was saying, Heaven Splitter is a big damage increase on bosses. You go into your Berserk form, and you wait for a big opening, and you spam that shit, as you'll see here in just a second with Serve. Like this. Doing large amounts of damage and phasing him very quickly. Here this mid-fight phase was pretty shit. We got staggered spawns and these little jumping bombing enemies which take forever to kill. Unfortunately for us, the rest of the fight goes very quickly. Serve decides to be somewhat kind. He does one thing in just a second, which is a bit annoying. This, he sort of camps in the lava, which fucks my positioning a bit and doesn't allow me to camp backstabs as much as I wanted to. But, thankfully for us, he decides to give favorable patterns and doesn't burrow. What I should have done was use health as a resource, knowing full well that I would be clicking Antler and rush into that hit. But I also kind of wanted to save Evade so I could play a bit more risky on P3 of Chronos. And that's Fields. We enter Tart with 6:45 on the clock, which was a PB for me for Fields. Here we are in Tartarus. This is sort of where good paces go to die, and where all dreams seem to crumble, as lots of Tartarus rooms can really kill your time. I don't know why the game is so fascinated with giving you nothing but skulls and gold bags, but it really tends to do that. Thankfully, we got very lucky in the start and did not end up seeing rooms like that. Starting off nicely with a Fig Room 1, which is very, very good for our timer. And following that up, we see armored gold bags in the form of a one wave, which is really, really good for our timer. Now, gold bags are notoriously a time sink and can be very evil, but if they're armored and paired with a big enemy like a thug like this in an early room, that's essentially a recipe for a time save. Here I got a little worried because I saw a lot of skulls in a relatively big tile, but I also saw this thug and was like, you know, this is probably not the worst. I'll tank a skulls room. And seeing 3 thugs over here was definitely reassuring for my mental, knowing that I wouldn't be completely fucked on timer. Here I end up taking the Hades store. I'm still a bit conflicted on whether you should take Hades on 62 speeds, but this one was so late and Nergal's room clear is so efficient that I think that I'm going to start taking the Hades room pretty much every run. I can't speak for all weapons, as not every weapon has the ability to clear rooms as efficiently as Nergal, but I think that Hades doors might be optimal for the time save that they will inevitably have in P3. This room was relatively quick, considering like enemy type, and we end up going into our final chamber here. Seeing armored satyrs was again a sigh of relief, which meant that the starters was really, really quite good. We end up seeing Tempe here, but they are armored and they are towards the end of the room, so it's not too big of a tunnel. And we clean up our final 2 satyrs and head into Kronos. Now, I saw that I had 8:15 on my clock and knew that I sort of had the sub 10 in the bag. A good Kronos sort of ranges from like a minute 30 to a minute 40, and that was well within our time constraint. All I had to do was play well and play quick. Now Kronos, unlike the other bosses for 62 speeds, you kind of just want to save your levers for that P3 so you can play it as recklessly as possible. This means managing the ad spawns while also focusing Kronos, because you don't want to divert too much time to the ads to where you lose time on Kronos. Now, Kronos on 62 speeds is definitely a unique fight. It feels more like a game of tag than an actual battle, since you combo breaker him so quickly. Losing a levers was unfortunate there, but it is what it is. We end up getting a big Heaven Splitter hit off on Kronos and take him into P2. P2 is very scripted. You sort of hope for a favorable spawn after the first combo break, and then you do a bunch of damage, and you combo break her once again. You kill the first 2 ads, you combo break her once more, and then follow him to his position and do as much damage as possible to phase him into P3. Now, looking at the clock, we have about 40 seconds to conclude the fight, and at this point I felt very comfortable doing so. I did make a bit of an error there, cutting in too quickly during the cutscene. I was hoping to camp around the 12-hour mark, knowing that Kronos would spawn near there, and end up having to take a bit of time to reroute myself over to him, and pull off a crazy side dodge in the process. Now, we phase him into P2 of P3. I ended up guessing wrong on his dashing and spawning position, but it's not too bad. We end up burning a dodge and then a levers on the immediate hit. I save my last levers to bum rush his scythe, and we get the kill, finishing the run with 9 minutes, 51 seconds, and 69 centiseconds. Very cool. And yeah, that has been the world's first, at least to my knowledge, sub 10 of 62 Fear Speed. I hope you enjoyed this video and this post commentary. I sort of had to do this post commentary on a whim because I recorded this run while in comms with friends, and the comms were relatively off topic, and it felt a bit crazy for such a run. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed. Do all the YouTube stuff, leave a like, subscribe, you know, all that if you want to. And I hope you enjoyed. I'm really coped on these speedruns, and I hope to do more in the future. And as Mel gives a peace sign, I'll sign off. Bye bye!